spanning tree. It is just a subgraph that includes all the vertices of the original graph, which is there, which is derived from that original graph, and it is a subgraph of the existing one. Original path has say n vertices, then spanning tree will have n number of vertices and exactly n number of vertices. Let's see what exactly we mean by minimum cost spanning tree. Earlier we just say spanning tree, we have the cost was specified for the edges. Now we have the edges to be specified for.
Okay, good morning everyone. We had some technical issue. That is why we had there is some problem with respect to admissions. Student admit request. What is that admit request? Accept admit request. Yeah, I did. What do I do? I did.
This one is also you can make include this. Why it's color this is also common sizing. So I'll not include this.
Anyway, let us continue with the previous. With the servlets. Last class also we had some technical issues. This class also, what is happening here? Using college ID. So anyway, let us continue with this Java servlets. So we have seen what servlets are and how client server works and how servlet program works. Then benefits of servlets as well as the life cycle of servlets. Then yeah, this is the servlet program which we have seen. Just to give you a quick refresh, for any Java servlet program, you have to import java x.servlet.x package .star package as well as java x.servlet.http.star package. Now these two packages are very important. That needs to be imported. Then this is the name of the servlet class. You can have any name for the servlet class. Always the servlet class should be public, as well as it has to extend HTTP servlet. That is, it has to inherit the functions, it has to inherit the properties of HTTP servlet as well as the methods of HTTP servlet class. Then within this class, there will not be any main method, but what we need to do is we need to either override do get method or do post method, depending upon which method or how the data is sent to the web server or this servlet. So if it is get method, then we have to write do get part. Do get method will be using two parameters, that is HTTP servlet request, where we are saying request, and HTTP servlet response, where we are saying response. Now this request and response can be any name of the parameter, doesn't matter, but we have to use HTTP servlet request object. It has to be servlet request object, and here also HTTP servlet response object should be there. Then this method we have to use what do we say? We have to explicitly handle the exceptions here. So in this case, we have to get a method. So we have to explicitly handle exceptions within this method. So we are using try catch. You can also use throws. Doesn't matter. Then within this class, you can have print writer out. We have to create an object as out. You can use any name for out, but it has to be a print writer object. Then what we have is get writer we need to use, and then using this get writer we will be able to using the get out.println we will be able to send the response as an HTML or any values what we have. Now once this program, obviously at the end we have to catch exceptions. Actually it will be throwing servlet exception, but if the other exceptions are also has to be caught, then we can simply use exception supermost class, that is exceptions class. Now this servlet cannot work directly. What this means is you can compile the servlet, but this servlet cannot run as a standalone application. You have to run this servlet using the what we say we need to use the servlet, or we need to run the servlet using something known as deployment descriptor, or this servlet will run within a web server, and web server will be using a deployment descriptor. So let us look at what deployment descriptor is. Deployment descriptor is just an XML file which is used to configure servlets or configure the web servers which uses servlets. Then there is a structure, particular structure within the web server where we need to place certain files and certain directories. This deployment descriptor will be placed in web-inf directory in the Tomcat server, Apache Tomcat server. We will look at the directory structure later. Then the deployment descriptor actually controls the behavior of how servlet works or how servlet runs. We may, assign a timeout for any session. We may assign several other, initialization things, as well as it's basically for controlling how a servlet works. Then the deployment descriptor actually has two parts. One is something is known as the servlet part. The other one is servlet mapping. Now, in servlet part, we have the tags or the elements which we describe as the servlet name and servlet class. Same in servlet mapping, we have something known as servlet name as well as the URL pattern. Now, this is the a sample deployment descriptor. Since we discussed that the deployment descriptor is an XML file. So here it starts, and specifically, this is a web deployment descriptor. The XML file is used as deployment descriptor so that a web server may know which servlet has to be loaded and which servlet has to run, or which how servlets are configured. So this deployment descriptor will contain the very first tag as web-inf. This is the root tag of the deployment descriptor, and this tag closes at the end slash web-app. Then within this, for each servlet, you are going to have a servlet block and a servlet mapping. There are two different blocks. So these two things will be there for every servlet. Now, in this case, if you remember, we have used the name of the servlet as my servlet. That is the class name as my servlet. So a servlet will have servlet name and servlet class. Servlet mapping will have servlet name. This is the same thing as what we have it here in servlet, and URL pattern. Now this servlet name is actually whatever name we feel like we can give it. This is just to hide our class names from, we can use this to hide the actual class name and provide the privacy there for our class names. So you can use any name here, doesn't matter. But whatever name you use, for example, in this case, we are using demo servlet. Even in servlet mapping servlet name, you should have the same name as what we used in servlet tag. So both the places you should have same name. And then as part of servlet class, we have to use the same class name what servlet we have written. We cannot use any class name. We have to use the same class name what we have written, the name which we have given to the servlet class. So that is my servlet. Then in the URL pattern, you have to use slash. This is a URL slash my URL servlet. You can use any name over here, doesn't matter. Like how we use servlet name, you can use any name over here, doesn't matter. So this is how a deployment descriptor is. What it says is, we have a servlet with a name as some demo servlet, and this servlet has a class is associated with the class as my servlet, which is a Java program which we have seen. And then how this servlet is used by the HTML pages or to give a request to the web server is using servlet mapping, which says that for this same servlet, that is demo servlet. The URL that a user can use to send request is /my URL servlet. So this is what we are going to have for a servlet. And remember that for every servlet, for example, this is the servlet you have seen. It's my servlet. Now, if I write another servlet, for example, this is a registration servlet for registering, processing the registration or storing the registration in a database. Now, I also have to write a servlet for logging in, to process logging, to check whether username password is same or not. So I cannot use the same program or same servlet. I have to write another servlet. So for each servlet, you will not, there will be only single deployment descriptor for the entire web application. That is this XML file. But for every servlet, you should have this servlet and servlet mapping. This block, you should have this complete block. Servlet with servlet mapping. So you may have many servlets, but for each servlet, we should have servlet and servlet mapping tags in XML. So this is just a sample. There will be a lot of information and data within this web app, but remember there should be only one deployment descriptor. Now the next thing is we will move on is the directory structure of a servlet. Now I told you that the deployment descriptor, that the XML file is stored, web.xml file is stored at a certain place in web-inf folder. So that is what we have. You have to look, we have to create a directory structure where within the web application where we can store certain files. Now, very first thing is when you have installed, or when we install, or when we create a web server and install Apache using Apache Tomcat, we get a folder known as Apache Software Foundation that will be created. It may be created in C drive, program files, so and so, or you may give a path. Just a minute, some problem is there with people trying to join. So let me just check up what is the problem here. Where am I? Are yaro ye tell her to join. Again, ये है क्या यहाँ पे? Just a minute, some people are trying to join. Some acceptance issues are coming up. Let me just handle those things. I also had to send you requester today showing, yeah, Google changed something. Google changed Google changed some settings since Monday. These shoes are coming up. Anyway. Okay, anyway, let us continue. So here, so we need a certain directory structure to store the our servlets, our HTML, all the files related to a web application or a website. So very first thing is we need to have this Apache have this Apache Tomcat server installed on a system wherever we are trying, whichever system we are saying that it will be a web server. Now, once we install Apache Tomcat server, it will be stored in Apache's. There will be a folder created known as Apache Software Foundation. It can be on C drive, it can be on D drive, or any drive as such. And then within this folder, we will have something known as what we say Tomcat directory. It is automatically created, Tomcat directory. Within this Tomcat directory, will find something known as web apps. So every in Apache Tomcat server, all the files or resources that needs to be, is part of a website or a portal or a application has to be there within this web apps. Then inside web apps, we have to create a name of our application or a website or what, you can use any name here. What I'm using is I'm using student app as the name. So Apache Software Foundation directory will already be there once you have installed. Tomcat will already be there once we have installed. Web app will be there created. But inside web apps, we have to create a folder and a directory known as. You can give any name, but in this case, I am using student app. That is, we have to create a folder with the name as your application name. Within this student apps, we have to create certain uh, directories, or this student app folder will be used to save certain types of files in certain places. All the HTMLs are directly HTML files, whatever your website or portal or web application may have. All these HTML files are directly saved inside students app folder. You have to save it inside that, only then it works. Then all Java server pages, though we have not seen yet that it's in the 5th unit, all Java server pages has to be stored there. All cascading style sheets, CSS, has to be stored directly in student app. All JavaScript files has to be stored and directly inside the student app. Then all images or some multimedia videos, whatever you may have, all these things, that is all HTML pages, all Java server pages, all your CSS cascading style sheet files, or your JavaScript files and images or any multimedia content, all these things has to be stored in the root of student app, that is directly inside student app. Then student app should have a folder or a directory known as web-inf. And remember, this is in capital letters. Web-inf is in capital letters. Everything is in capital letters. Now this web-inf may contain lib folder. This is folder is used for library. So for example, if we are using some SMS package, or if our application tries to send some messages or do some transactional services, or if it has to connect to a database, then all these packages or jar files, what we call, are stored in the lib folder, which is known as library. So all the jar files, all the packages are stored in the lib folder, and this lib folder is inside web-inf folder inside our application folder, that is in this case it is student app. Now, so student app is our application folder. So within this, all HTML directly JavaScript as well as JSP and CSS images are stored, and then we have to create a folder known as web-inf. Inside that, you may or may not have lib folder, and this you may or may not create a lib folder, but this lib folder is used to have to store the jar files or all the packages which we will be using or which our application will be using. Then we have to have classes folder. Within this classes folder, you will be able to save all your servlets, or I mean, you can have source code also there, but it doesn't matter what it needs. It needs a compiled servlets. That is the class files of your servlet. So within the classes folder, you will be having all the classes, all the servlet classes. For example, last class I mean the last slide we have used my servlet as the class for our sample servlet. So when we compile it, we will be getting my servlet.class file. That class file has to be placed inside this classes folder. Then the last thing what we need to have, so all servlets, whatever servlets you may have, you have to place those class files in the classes folder. Then the last thing what we have is web.xml file. This is known as a deployment descriptor. And this deployment descriptor, this is the one which we have seen in the just the immediate previous slide, where we have defined what the name of the servlet is, what the class servlet will be using, which class name, and then as well as we have also defined how the URL pattern is what URL pattern is used, or how we can define a different URL pattern there. So this web.xml file is a deployment descriptor. It's an XML file and has to be placed within student app, that is our application folder. Within that web-inf, this is in caps letters, remember, and within this we will have lib, classes, and web.xml file. So this is where this is the actual the directory structure, servlets directory structure. What we need to adhere to and have to use the same classification, or we have to use the same classific category of files, and we have to place them in their respective folders. And this has to be done for every application you create. This is just the one application we are using, or we are saying, that is students app. We may have another application, or we may have other things, other websites or portals or web applications within the same web server. So for every application, we have to create a different folder, give a different name for that application, and that has to be saved in web apps folder. And it has to follow the same structure of what we have seen here. Now let us look at go further. I said that we can also have HTML files stored. So my servlet.class file is stored in classes within web-inf classes. Now we will look at the HTML. Now here HTML, this is simple HTML. You all know, all the tags are familiar to you. But let us look at what this form tag is. Inside this form tag, we are using method as get. So that is the reason. That is the reason we have used do get. That is the reason we used do get method here. So if your method is do post, then, if your method is post, then you have to use do post, or you have to override do post method in your servlet. So that is the reason in this case we have used do get method. Now the next thing is we have action attribute. This action attribute, you can see it uses /student app. This is the application name, that is student app, which we are using, and /my servlet. If you remember the /my servlet, let us go back and look at the deployment descriptor. Here you should have my servlet. Whatever URL pattern you are having here, you should be using at this place. You should be using at this place, though. In the sample, I have used my URL servlet, and here I'm using my servlet. But remember that they both have to be same. Both the URL pattern and what pattern we use in action they have to be same. Then this is just a simple what do we call input, taking the name and password and just having a submit button. Now this is how we create a login form. That is a sample HTML what we have seen. So this is just the screenshot of what HTML we have written here. Then this is its corresponding servlet. Let us look at this. Now before looking at this servlet, we will look at the deployment descriptor. So here in this deployment descriptor, what I am trying to do, it is servlet name, my servlet I am using. You can see here we have my servlet. क्या हो रहा है ये? अब क्या हुआ? Okay, so this is the deployment descriptor. You can find here my servlet is the name of my servlet. Over here is even here I'm using my servlet as the name of the servlet, and the same way I'm just not to have any confusion, I'm using the same name over here, that is my servlet for the servlet class. So if we go back, this is my servlet, that is my servlet class. Then URL pattern I'm using as my servlet as the URL pattern. So that is the reason here in the HTML form I have used /my servlet as the URL, the pattern for the URL. So action. So what happens is once the user clicks the submit button, or over here once the user clicks the the login button, what actually happens is the entire data, that is in this case the data which user has typed, that is name and password, will be sent to student app. Inside student app my servlet. Now let us look at what happens here in my servlet. Obviously there we were using get method, so here we have do get. There we I mean the where we have get method, we use get method in the form. So here we have to handle or use do get method to handle its request. Then we have the same parameter, that is HTTP request, HTTP servlet request, and so HTTP servlet response. And we have created a print writer and used out as the object, which we have initialized with the response.getWriter. Now, in the first servlet, or the first example, we just sent an output. We have not actually, we received a request, but not a data. We received a request, we sent a response back. But here what we are trying to do it, with the request, we are trying to retrieve some data. What user is going to send? That is, user is going to send us the username and the password. So let us just go back. Here we have name for the input tag as sname. So to retrieve that sname, what user may type and send the data, we have to use the request object, that is request.get parameter. And this get parameter, we have to pass the name of the parameter. So if we look at the array, so if we look at this array arrow, so if we look at this, we have sname as the parameter. So we are using sname in get parameter method and pwd as the password for the attribute or for the input tag password. So here we are using pwd with get parameter method. So that these two things we have stored as a string, that is with str name and str pass. And then we used output out.println, and this till here just the strings we are sending. And over here, if you look, what we are trying to do is we have retrieved this, and then in str name we will be saving the username. So we are trying to output the username to the user, and str password contains the password if user has typed. So that is what we are trying to output it again in the next statement. So these are some pluses, nothing but just a concatenation operator, concatenate strings. So what actually happens is when user types some username and password and sends it to the server or servlet, or clicks the login button, the user has typed something and clicks this login button. This we are calling a servlet. Servlet will retrieve the S name, username, and PW as a password, store it in str name, str password, and using the out object, or from using the response object, we are trying to send this data of username and password back to the user. So this is just a sample program. So we get the output as whatever user has typed his username as well as the password. So this, though this servlet was just an example to show you how we retrieve the values and we can process those values. But in real sense, we are not going to send the what do we call username password back to the user. We generally try to connect to a database and access it or checks whether the credentials are authentic or not, and then depending on that we transfer the request to another servlet, that is maybe the menu servlet or another web page. If the data are if the username password is correct. Otherwise, we may transfer the request um, to a forgot password page or to some page saying that login information is incorrect. So this was all about a simple servlets, how we write. Always remember that servlets are Java programs, but they do not run by itself. They need to run within a container, which is nothing but a web server. And since servlets are Java programs, so Java server programs, so uh, to run or execute a servlet, we need to use Apache Tomcat server or IBM WebSphere or JBoss or any web server that supports Java. Now let us talk about the next thing or very important topic within this fourth unit. That is the last part of this fourth unit, which is sessions tracking. Now, this is very important because once a user logs in, he cannot be logged in forever. There should be some mechanism to track uh, from where the user has logged or uh, how much time the user needs to be logged in. So, how much time he's inactive for, and then we log out or we end end his flow or end his authentication. So all these things, there should be some mechanism to do that. So these things are done using session stacking. Now, actually, there are 4 ways to track sessions. We will look at these methods in the coming slides, but the foremost thing is whenever a client sends a request or whenever a client, again request आ दी यार मेरे को ये क्या तो भी है ये अरे साहब वो गूगल वाला वो एडमिट का चेंज कर दिया किरकिरी हो रही अच्छा अरे वो एडमिट की किरकिरी हो रही ना ये क्लासेस में भी एडमिट का प्रॉब्लम आ रहा नहीं आ सकते क्विक एक्सेस ऑन है हाँ हाँ नहीं मैं बोल रहा हूँ पहले अपने को नहीं था ना ऐसा सहूलत थी ना नहीं तो आप बंद कर दीजिए नहीं बंद नहीं करा खुला नहीं है ऑन कर लीजिए क्या की कर रहा हूँ मैंने ऑफ है क्विक एक्सेस नहीं मतलब ऑन रखना अच्छा ऑन कर दो हाँ पहले ये सब नहीं था फैसा बस वो कर दिया what we will do is there is some who was trying to join the class. Somebody was trying to join the class. I had having a little problem here and trying to admit it. So anyway, this sessions is a very important topic. So what I'll try to do is we need to check. I need to check some of the settings and all. So if you want, you be logged in. I'll be checking the settings and all, so that it will be easy for you to log in. So you don't log off, be in the class. We will be looking at these things, and we will continue this the class from 12:30 or 12:20, 12:30. We'll come back and continue this class. So be within this class. I'll be checking up whatever issues are there, and then we'll continue the class from 12:20.